Dr. Zethrak's tentacles trembled as he approached the Medical Records Archive on Station Omega-7. The Galactic Medical Council had assigned him to review the classified files of a human patient, but every request had been met with bureaucratic delays and suspicious glances from the station's administrators. The Vorthak physician had spent 30 cycles studying alien biology across 17 different species. He had dissected the crystalline hearts of silicoid warriors, analyzed the photosynthetic blood of the Chlorian refugees, and even performed emergency surgery on a methane breather during a deep space crisis. Nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for the resistance he encountered when trying to access human medical data. Dr. Zethrak, the station's chief administrator, Commander Yilos, greeted him with barely concealed nervousness. I must remind you that the files you're requesting are classified under the Deathworld protocol. Perhaps you could reconsider your research focus? Zethrak's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary ones remained fixed on the sealed data terminal. Commander, I am a licensed xenobiologist with Level 9 clearance. The Galactic Medical Council specifically assigned me to compile a comprehensive study on human physiology for our medical databases. How can I complete this assignment if I cannot access the basic medical records? The commander's feathers ruffled anxiously. It's not that simple, Doctor. Human medical data is unique. The classification exists for good reason. What could possibly be so dangerous about medical records? Zethrak's voice carried the frustration of weeks of stonewalling. Are you suggesting that human anatomy is somehow a threat to galactic security? Yilos exchanged glances with his aide, a nervous crystalline whose form flickered with uncertainty. Doctor, perhaps you should speak with someone who has actually treated humans before making your final decision about this research. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, Zethrak replied, his patience wearing thin. But every human medical professional I've contacted either refuses to discuss their work or refers me back to these classified files. The commander sighed, a sound like wind through dried leaves. Very well. I'll arrange a meeting with Dr. Sarah Chen. She's the only human physician currently on station. But I warn you, after you speak with her, you may not want to proceed with your research. 3 hours later, Zethrak sat across from Dr. Chen in the station's medical bay. The human woman appeared deceptively fragile, her small frame and soft features giving no indication of the species that had somehow earned a Deathworld classification in the Galactic Medical Database. Dr. Zethrak, she began, her voice carrying an odd mixture of amusement and concern. I understand you want access to human medical records for your research. Yes, Zethrak replied, studying her carefully. I've treated hundreds of alien species, but humans seem to be the only ones whose medical data is classified. I find this curious. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, a strange smile playing across her features. Curious is one word for it. Tell me, Doctor, what do you know about Earth? Very little, Zethrak admitted. The planet is listed as a Class 12 Deathworld in our databases, but the specific details are restricted. I assumed this was due to some sort of political sensitivity. Not political, Dr. Chen said softly. Biological. Earth isn't just dangerous because of its predators or its weather. Earth is dangerous because of what it does to the things that live there. Zethrak's tentacles curled with interest. What do you mean? Dr. Chen stood and walked to the medical bay's viewing port, gazing out at the stars. Every species in the galaxy evolved on worlds that we would consider gentle, stable climates, predictable seasons, manageable gravity. Your species, for example, evolved on a world with 0.7 standard gravity and an atmosphere so stable that your people never developed efficient cardiovascular systems. This is basic xenobiology, Zethrak replied, though he was beginning to feel uneasy about where this conversation was heading. Yes, it is. But Earth? Dr. Chen turned back to him, her eyes holding a depth that seemed almost predatory. Earth tried to kill everything that ever lived there. Massive climate changes, asteroid impacts, ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plague, famine, predators that could crush most galactic species without effort. For 4 billion years, Earth was a crucible that forged every living thing in fire. Zethrak's secondary hearts began beating faster. And humans survived this? We didn't just survive it, Doctor. We thrived in it. We became it. Dr. Chen activated a holographic display showing human anatomical charts. Look at these numbers. Really look at them. Zethrak examined the data, and his primary eyes widened in shock. This can't be correct. These cardiovascular readings are normal for a healthy human adult, Dr. Chen confirmed. Our hearts pump with enough force to circulate blood through a body that can function in gravity 3 times what most species consider survivable. Our bone density is nearly 12 times that of the average galactic citizen. Our muscle fiber can generate forces that would tear apart most alien physiologies. But you appear so... Zethrak struggled for words. Fragile? Dr. Chen laughed, and there was something unsettling about the sound. That's the really interesting part. We look harmless because we evolved alongside things that make us look harmless by comparison. On Earth, we're actually considered physically weak. Zethrak's analytical mind began processing the implications. If this data is accurate, then humans are essentially living weapons. Your very existence would be considered a threat by most galactic civilizations. Now you're beginning to understand why the files are classified, Dr. Chen said quietly. But that's just the beginning. The real fun starts when you look at our medical treatment protocols. She activated another display, this one showing surgical procedures and treatment methodologies. Zethrak examined the data for several moments before his tentacles began trembling uncontrollably. You cut into yourselves, he whispered. Deliberately. For healing. Surgery is a basic medical procedure for us, Dr. Chen explained. We can survive having our bodies opened, organs removed, bones broken and reset, massive blood loss, chemical toxins that would kill most species instantly. We've developed medical techniques based on the assumption that the patient can survive almost anything we do to them. Zethrak was beginning to understand why every medical professional he'd contacted had refused to discuss human treatment. The Galactic Medical Ethics Council would classify most of your procedures as torture, which is why human medical data is classified, Dr. Chen said. It's not just that we're dangerous. It's that our very approach to medicine would be considered barbaric by galactic standards. We routinely perform procedures that would be classified as war crimes if done to most alien species. But surely, Zethrak protested, his scientific curiosity warring with growing horror. There must be some explanation, some environmental factor that makes this necessary. Dr. Chen's smile became decidedly predatory. Oh, there is. Would you like to see what happens when we try to treat other species using standard galactic medical protocols? Before Zethrak could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the medical bay. Emergency lights bathed the room in red as Commander Yilos's voice echoed over the communication system. Medical emergency in Docking Bay 7. All available medical personnel report immediately. We have casualties from a merchant vessel collision. Dr. Chen was already moving, grabbing medical supplies with practiced efficiency. Come along, Doctor. If you want to understand human medicine, you're about to get a first-hand demonstration. Zethrak followed, his mind racing with questions and growing dread. As they hurried through the station's corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to witness something that would fundamentally change his understanding of medicine, biology, and the human species. The docking bay was chaos when they arrived. A silicoid merchant ship had suffered a catastrophic drive failure and collided with the station's docking array. Crystalline beings lay scattered across the deck, their normally perfect geometric forms cracked and leaking their vital mineral solutions. Zethrak immediately knelt beside the nearest victim. a young silicoid whose crystal matrix was fractured in 17 different places. Using standard galactic medical protocols, he began applying harmonic resonance therapy to encourage natural crystalline regrowth. "Doctor!" Dr. Chen called from across the bay, where she was examining a silicoid whose entire left side had been shattered. "This one needs immediate intervention. The fractures are spreading to her core matrix." Zethrak looked up from his patient. "Harmonic therapy is the only approved treatment for silicoid crystal damage. Any other approach would be—" He stopped speaking as he watched Dr. Chen produce a device that looked disturbingly similar to a cutting tool. The human physician was examining the silicoid's fractures with an intensity that made Zethrak's tentacles curl with unease. What happened next would haunt Zethrak for the rest of his very long life. Dr. Chen activated her cutting device and began slicing away the damaged crystal fragments with surgical precision. The silicoid's form flickered weakly, but instead of the agonized death throes that should have accompanied such brutal treatment, the patient's vital signs actually began stabilizing. Zethrak watched in horror and fascination as the human physician carved away nearly 30% of the silicoid's crystal matrix, removing pieces that conventional galactic medicine would have spent months trying to heal with harmonic therapy. Yet somehow, impossibly, the patient was not only surviving, but improving. "What are you doing?" Zethrak called out, abandoning his own patient to rush over to Dr. Chen's side. "You're destroying her crystalline structure!" Dr. Chen didn't look up from her work as she began installing synthetic crystal patches to bridge the gaps she had created. "I'm saving her life. The fractures were spreading faster than harmonic therapy could heal them. In another 10 minutes, they would have reached her core matrix and killed her. But the trauma, the shock to her system—" Zethrak's voice trailed off as he realized that the silicoid's vital signs were not only stable, but stronger than they had been when Dr. Chen began the procedure. "Silicoids are tougher than your medical textbooks suggest," Dr. Chen explained, sealing the last synthetic patch into place. "Their species has been telling galactic medicine what they think we want to hear about their pain tolerance and healing capabilities. They don't want to be seen as too different from the galactic norm." Zethrak looked around the docking bay and realized that Dr. Chen wasn't the only medical professional using unconventional techniques. Human medics were treating the other casualties with methods that should have been killing them, but were instead producing miraculous recoveries. A human medic named Johnson was treating a gaseous being whose containment field had been damaged in the collision. Instead of the delicate field harmonics that galactic protocol demanded, Johnson had simply grabbed a portable field generator and was manually recalibrating it while the patient remained conscious and apparently comfortable. "This is impossible," Zethrak muttered, watching as another human medic performed what looked like emergency surgery on a crystalline being using tools that resembled mining equipment. Dr. Chen finished with her patient and moved to help with the others. "Dr. Zethrak, would you mind assisting with the triage? We have more casualties incoming from the merchant ship." Zethrak found himself working alongside the human medical team, and what he witnessed over the next 3 hours fundamentally challenged every assumption he had made about medicine, biology, and the nature of life itself. The humans weren't just treating their patients with aggressive techniques. They were reading biological signs and making treatment decisions at speeds that should have been impossible. Where galactic medical practice required hours of careful analysis and consultation, the humans were making accurate diagnoses in minutes and implementing treatment plans that flew in the face of established protocols. "How?" Zethrak finally asked Dr. Chen as they worked together to stabilize a methane breather whose respiratory system had been compromised. "How are you making these decisions so quickly?" Dr. Chen paused in her work to look at him. "Pattern recognition. When you've spent your entire evolutionary history dealing with trauma, injury, and emergency medicine, you develop instincts that other species simply don't have." But the risks you're taking are calculated, Dr. Chen interrupted. Every species in the galaxy has been telling galactic medicine that they're more fragile than they really are because they're afraid of being treated like humans treat humans. They see our medical practices as barbaric because they can't imagine surviving them. Zethrak watched as she performed a procedure on the methane breather that involved temporarily stopping its respiratory function entirely. By all galactic medical standards, this should have killed the patient immediately. Instead, the being's vital signs improved dramatically. You're saying that other species are more resilient than they claim? I'm saying that evolution doesn't produce weaklings, Dr. Chen replied. Every species that survived to achieve space travel had to overcome challenges that would kill the weak. They just did it on worlds that were gentler than Earth, so they didn't need to develop the same tolerance for trauma that we did. As the emergency response continued, Zethrak began to notice something else disturbing. The human medical team wasn't just effective. They were enjoying their work. There was an energy, an excitement to their movements that suggested they found the chaos and danger exhilarating rather than stressful. Dr. Chen, he said quietly, Are you enjoying this? She looked at him with surprise. Of course. Emergency medicine is what we train for. This is when we're at our best. But people are injured, dying. Which is exactly why this matters, Dr. Chen replied. This is when we get to save lives. When we get to push the boundaries of what's possible. When we get to prove that death doesn't get to win. The casual way she spoke about defying death sent chills through Zethrak's nervous system. It was becoming clear that humans didn't just practice aggressive medicine. They had a fundamentally different relationship with mortality than any other species in the galaxy. Over the following hours, as the crisis subsided and the casualties were stabilized, Zethrak found himself in conversation with various members of the human medical team. Each conversation only deepened his growing sense of unease about what he had witnessed. Dr. Johnson, the medic who had worked on the gaseous being, explained that humans routinely survived injuries that would be instantly fatal to most galactic species. We've got redundant systems for our redundant systems, he said cheerfully. Evolution made us really hard to kill. Nurse Martinez described how human children were expected to survive injuries that would require immediate hospitalization for most alien juveniles. Kids are basically indestructible, she laughed. They have to be, or our species never would have made it past the first generation. Dr. Rodriguez, the emergency surgeon, casually mentioned that humans regularly performed medical procedures on themselves when proper medical care wasn't available. Field medicine is pretty basic stuff. Most of us can handle our own emergency treatment if we have to. As Zethrak listened to these conversations, he began to understand why human medical data was classified. It wasn't just that human medicine was aggressive or that humans were physically resilient. It was that humans represented a completely different approach to the relationship between life and death. Every other species in the galaxy treated death as a powerful force to be respected and carefully avoided. Humans treated death as an opponent to be defeated through violence, aggression, and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. Dr. Zethrak, Commander Yelos approached him as the medical bay finally returned to normal operations. I trust today's events have been educational? Zethrak looked around at the human medical team, who were cleaning up with the same casual efficiency they had shown during the emergency. I'm beginning to understand why you were reluctant to grant me access to the files. The Deathworld protocol exists for a reason, Yelos said quietly. Most species aren't ready to learn what humans are really like. The peaceful diplomatic humans that serve in our government and our scientific institutions represent their species' best efforts to appear non-threatening to the galactic community. And their medical practices represent what they're really like, Yelos replied. Dr. Chen and her team just demonstrated techniques that most of the galaxy would classify as weapons rather than medical procedures. They saved lives today using methods that our own medical ethics boards would consider war crimes. Zethrak was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had witnessed. "I still want to see the files," he said finally. Commander Yilos's feathers ruffled with surprise. "After everything you've seen today?" "Because of everything I've seen today," Zethrak corrected. "If human medicine can achieve results like this, then the galactic medical community needs to know about it. We've been treating patients with kid gloves when we should have been saving more lives." Dr. Chen approached them, having overheard the conversation. "Dr. Zethrak, are you certain about this? Once you've seen our full medical protocols, you won't be able to unsee them. Most alien physicians who review our techniques can never practice medicine the same way again." Zethrak looked at the patients who had been treated during the emergency. Every single one was alive and recovering, including several who should have died according to conventional galactic medical wisdom. "How many lives could we save if the galactic medical community learned to practice medicine like humans?" he asked. Dr. Chen's expression became serious. "Potentially millions. But at what cost? Most species would view us as monsters if they knew what our medicine really looked like." "Maybe," Zethrak replied. "Or maybe they would finally understand that humans aren't just another species from another world. Maybe they would understand that you're something entirely different." Commander Yilos sighed heavily. "Dr. Zethrak, I'm going to ask you one final time to reconsider this research. The classified files contain information that will fundamentally change how you view not just human medicine, but human civilization itself." Zethrak thought about the silicoid whose life Dr. Chen had saved by carving away damaged crystal with the casual efficiency of an artist shaping stone. He thought about the methane breather who had survived having its respiratory system temporarily shut down. He thought about the humans working with tools that looked more like weapons than medical instruments. "I need to see those files," he said firmly. What he would learn in those files would shatter his understanding of what it meant to be human, and force him to confront a terrible question. If humans could casually perform medical miracles that seemed impossible to the rest of the galaxy, what else were they capable of when their survival was truly threatened? The classified archive chamber was deeper in the station than Zethrak had ever been. Multiple security checkpoints, biometric scanners, and psychological evaluation protocols had delayed his access for another full day. Commander Yilos had personally escorted him to the chamber, his nervous energy more pronounced than ever. "Last chance, Doctor," Yilos said as they approached the final security door. "Once you access these files, the information becomes part of your official knowledge base. You'll be required to sign confidentiality agreements that will restrict your ability to share this information with anyone below Level 9 clearance." Zethrak's tentacles were steady as he placed them on the biometric scanner. "I understand the implications." The chamber beyond was sterile and cold, containing only a single data terminal and a chair designed for multi-species use. As Zethrak settled into position, the terminal activated automatically, recognizing his biometric signature and clearance level. The first files that loaded made his secondary hearts stop beating. Human medical history. Evolutionary trauma response. The document began with a simple statement that redefined everything he thought he knew about human civilization. Human medicine developed not as a healing art, but as a battlefield necessity. All human medical knowledge originates from treating wounds inflicted during constant warfare against their environment, their planet, and each other. The files contained video documentation of human medical procedures spanning their entire recorded history. Zethrak watched in growing horror as humans performed surgeries without anesthesia, treated massive trauma with primitive tools, and routinely survived injuries that should have been fatal to any biological entity. A subsection labeled Pain Tolerance Studies contained data that made Zethrak's analytical mind struggle to process the numbers. Humans could function normally with pain levels that would render most galactic species unconscious or dead from shock. They had developed neurological adaptations that allowed them to continue fighting, working, and thinking clearly while experiencing trauma that would shut down any other known nervous system. But the truly disturbing information came in the psychological profiles. Humans, the file stated, have evolved psychological mechanisms that not only allow them to inflict necessary medical trauma on others, but to derive satisfaction from the process. Human physicians report feelings of accomplishment, excitement, and pleasure when performing procedures that other species would classify as torture. Zethrak read this section 3 times before accepting that he was understanding it correctly. Humans didn't just tolerate aggressive medical procedures. Their doctors actually enjoyed performing them. The next section contained combat medical footage from various human military conflicts. Zethrak watched human medics working in active battlefields, performing complex surgeries while under fire, treating massive trauma with calm efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. They weren't just saving lives, they were doing it while experiencing what appeared to be an adrenaline-fueled euphoria. Note, read a commentary from a galactic observer. Human combat medics exhibit behavioral patterns consistent with predatory hunting instincts when treating patients. They appear to view medical emergencies as hunting opportunities, with death as the prey to be defeated. Zethrak paused the video and sat back in his chair, his mind struggling to process what he was learning. Humans didn't just practice medicine differently. They had evolved to enjoy the process of cutting into living flesh, manipulating internal systems, and performing procedures that would traumatize most species just to witness. The files continued with analyses of human medical education. Unlike other species, who approached medical training with reverence and careful study, humans were taught to practice their procedures on dead members of their own species. They called these corpses cadavers, and treated the dismemberment of their own dead as routine educational material. Human medical students, the report noted, show no psychological distress when required to dissect human corpses. In fact, many report curiosity and excitement. This suggests an evolutionary adaptation that allows humans to view other biological entities, including their own species, as mechanical systems to be understood and manipulated. Zethrak's tentacles began trembling as he read further. The file contained recordings of human medical students during their training, laughing and joking while they cut apart human bodies. They gave their cadavers names and talked to them as they worked, displaying a casualness about death and dismemberment that should have been psychologically impossible. The next section was titled Human Pain Infliction Protocols and contained information that made Zethrak seriously consider stopping his research entirely. Humans, the files revealed, had developed medical techniques specifically designed to inflict controlled pain for therapeutic purposes. They called it physical therapy and rehabilitation, but the procedures involved deliberately causing tissue damage, joint stress, and muscular trauma that patients were expected to endure while conscious and cooperative. Video footage showed human therapists manipulating patient joints beyond their normal range of motion, deliberately causing micro tears in muscle tissue and using devices that applied electrical current directly to nervous systems. The patients not only tolerated this treatment, but paid for the privilege of receiving it. Human patients, the analysis noted, have been conditioned to believe that healing requires suffering. They actively seek out medical professionals who will inflict trauma upon them and express dissatisfaction with treatments that do not involve significant pain. Zethrak realized he was hyperventilating and forced himself to calm down. The implications of what he was reading were staggering. Humans had essentially weaponized medicine, turning healing into an aggressive assault on biological systems that somehow produced positive results. The final section of the medical files contained the information that would haunt Zethrak for the rest of his life: human pediatric medicine. Human children, the files revealed, were routinely subjected to medical procedures that would be considered child abuse if performed on any other species. They received injections containing weakened disease organisms deliberately introduced to trigger immune responses. They were subjected to dental procedures that involved drilling into their teeth and extracting healthy tissue. They underwent surgical procedures for cosmetic and social reasons that had no medical necessity whatsoever, and the children were expected to endure all of this without complaint. Human offspring, the report stated, are conditioned from birth to accept medical trauma as normal and necessary. By adulthood, they view pain, invasion of their bodies, and deliberate tissue damage as routine health care rather than assault. Video footage showed human children receiving medical care, their reactions ranging from mild discomfort to stoic acceptance. What should have been traumatic experiences that would require psychological counseling for other species were treated as routine appointments that children were expected to schedule and attend voluntarily. Zethrak found himself staring at footage of a human child, perhaps 8 years old by galactic standards, calmly receiving an injection while chatting with the physician about school activities. The child showed no fear, no distress, no indication that having a sharp object penetrate their flesh was anything other than a normal part of life. The final document in the archive was a psychological evaluation of the human medical team stationed on Omega-7. Dr. Chen and her colleagues had been subjected to extensive psychological analysis to determine their fitness for service in a multi-species environment. The results were terrifying. All human medical personnel, the report concluded, exhibit psychological profiles consistent with controlled sociopathy. They demonstrate the ability to inflict significant trauma on other beings without experiencing appropriate emotional responses. They report satisfaction and pleasure when performing procedures that other species find disturbing or horrifying. However, the report continued, this apparent sociopathy appears to be a species-wide adaptation rather than individual pathology. Human physicians genuinely care about their patients' welfare and work tirelessly to preserve life and reduce suffering. Their ability to inflict necessary medical trauma appears to be a specialized evolutionary development that allows them to provide effective health care despite the aggressive nature of their medical techniques. The report recommended that human medical personnel be allowed to continue their work, but should never be permitted to treat non-human patients without extensive supervision and cultural sensitivity training. Zethrak closed the files and sat in silence for nearly an hour, his mind struggling to process everything he had learned. Humans weren't just another species with unusual medical practices. They were predators who had somehow evolved the ability to channel their aggressive instincts into healing arts. They were living weapons who used their capacity for violence to save lives rather than take them. When he finally emerged from the archive chamber, Commander Yillos was waiting for him. "Well, Doctor?" Yillos asked quietly. "Do you still believe the galactic medical community needs to know about human medicine?" Zethrak looked at the commander for a long moment before answering. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the galactic community needs to understand what humans really are." "And what are they?" Zethrak thought about Dr. Chen carving away crystal matrix with the casual efficiency of a sculptor, about human children accepting medical trauma as routine, about medical students laughing while they dissected their own dead. "They're the reason the Deathworld protocol exists," he said finally. "They're not just from a dangerous planet. They are the dangerous planet. They're what happens when evolution creates a species that survives by becoming more dangerous than everything trying to kill it." Commander Yillos nodded sadly. "And now you understand why their medical records are classified. The galaxy isn't ready to know that humanity has weaponized the healing arts. They're not ready to learn that humans view medical care as a form of controlled warfare against death itself. Zethrak looked back toward the archive chamber. What do I do with this information? What every other researcher who has seen these files does, Yillos replied. You write a report recommending continued classification, you sign your confidentiality agreements, and you spend the rest of your career wondering whether humanity represents the galaxy's greatest hope for medical advancement or its most terrifying threat. As Zethrak walked back through the station's corridors, he passed the medical bay where Dr. Chen and her team were conducting routine examinations. Through the transparent walls, he could see them working with their characteristic efficiency and enthusiasm, treating their alien patients with techniques that had been carefully modified to appear less threatening than their true capabilities. He realized that every human in the galactic community was essentially living a lie, pretending to be something gentler and more civilized than they really were. They had learned to hide their true nature behind diplomatic smiles and careful cultural sensitivity, but underneath that facade lurked predators who had evolved to see healing and violence as different applications of the same fundamental skill set. The most disturbing part was that they were genuinely trying to help. Their aggressive medical practices, their enjoyment of medical procedures, their casual attitude toward pain and trauma, all of it was directed toward preserving life and reducing suffering. They were monsters who had chosen to become healers, and they were better at it than any other species in the galaxy. As Zethrak reached his quarters, he realized that he faced an impossible choice. He could recommend that human medical techniques be studied and adapted for use with other species, potentially saving millions of lives. But doing so would also mean revealing to the galaxy that humans were essentially apex predators who had learned to hunt death instead of prey. He sat at his desk and began writing his report, knowing that whatever he chose to recommend would fundamentally change the relationship between humanity and the rest of galactic civilization. The only question was whether that change would save the galaxy or terrify it beyond recovery. In the end, Zethrak realized, the most frightening thing about humans wasn't their medical practices or their tolerance for violence. It was that they had somehow managed to become the galaxy's most effective healers while remaining its most dangerous predators. They had achieved the impossible. They had learned to be monsters in service of mercy. And the galaxy would never be the same once it learned the truth about the species that had volunteered to save it from itself.